Indian Subcontinent. History of India. Part 2. What do you know about the history of India? Vedic period. Vedic period. Historical Vedic religion and Vedas. Indo-Aryan peoples and Indo-Aryan migrations. Starting ca. 1900 BC, Indo-Aryan tribes moved into the Punjab from Central Asia in several waves of migration. The Vedic period is the period when the Vedas were composed, the liturgical hymns from the Indo-Aryan people. The Vedic culture was located in part of northwest India, while other parts of India had a distinct cultural identity. Many regions of the Indian subcontinent transitioned from the Chalcolithic to the Iron Age in this period. The Vedic culture is described in the texts of Vedas, still sacred to Hindus, which were orally composed and transmitted in Vedic Sanskrit. The Vedas are some of the oldest extant texts in India. The Vedic period, lasting from about 1500 to 500 BCE, contributed the foundations of several cultural aspects of the Indian subcontinent. Historians have analyzed the Vedas to posit a Vedic culture in the Punjab region and the upper Gangetic plain. The people tree and cow were sanctified by the time of the Atharva Veda. Many of the concepts of Indian philosophy espoused later, like Dharma, trace their roots to Vedic antecedents. Early Vedic society is described in the Rigveda, the oldest Vedic text, believed to have been compiled during 2nd millennium BCE, in the northwestern region of the Indian subcontinent. At this time, Aryan society consisted of largely tribal and pastoral groups, distinct from the Harappan urbanization which had been abandoned. The early Indo-Aryan presence probably corresponds, in part, to the ochre-colored pottery culture in archaeological contexts. At the end of the Rigvedic period, the Aryan society began to expand from the northwestern region of the Indian subcontinent into the western Ganges plain. It became increasingly agricultural and was socially organized around the hierarchy of the 4 varnas, or social classes. This social structure was characterized both by syncretizing with the native cultures of northern India, but also eventually by the excluding of some indigenous peoples by labeling their occupations impure. During this period, many of the previous small tribal units and chiefdoms began to coalesce into Janapadas. The Iron Age in the Indian subcontinent from about 1200 BCE to the 6th century BCE is defined by the rise of Janapadas, which are realms, republics, and kingdoms, notably the Iron Age kingdoms of Kuru, Panchala, Kosala, Vaidya. The Kuru kingdom was the first state-level society of the Vedic period, corresponding to the beginning of the Iron Age in northwestern India, around 100,800 BCE, as well as with the composition of the Atharvaveda. The Kuru state organized the Vedic hymns into collections and developed the Esrata ritual to uphold the social order. 2 key figures of the Kuru state were King Parikshit and his successor Janamejaya, transforming this realm into the dominant political, social, and cultural power of northern India. When the Kuru kingdom declined, the center of Vedic culture shifted to their eastern neighbors, the Panchala kingdom. The archaeological PGW culture, which flourished in the Haryana and western Uttar Pradesh regions of northern India from about 1100 to 600 BCE, is believed to correspond to the Kuru and Panchala kingdoms. During the late Vedic period, the kingdom of Vaidya emerged as a new center of Vedic culture, situated even farther to the east, reaching its prominence under the king Janaka, whose court provided patronage for Brahmin sages and philosophers such as Yajnavalkya, Aruni, and Gargi Vachaknavi. The later part of this period corresponds with a consolidation of increasingly large states and kingdoms, called Mahajanapadas, across northern India. The period between 800 and 200 BCE saw the formation of the Sramana movement, from which Jainism and Buddhism originated. The first Upanishads were written during this period. After 500 BCE, the so-called second urbanization started, with new urban settlements arising at the Ganges plain. The foundations for the second urbanization were laid prior to 600 BC in the painted grayware culture of the Gagar Hakra and Upper Ganges plain. Although most PGW sites were small farming villages, several dozen PGW sites eventually emerged as relatively the period from c. 600 BCE to c. 300 BCE witnessed the rise of the Mahajanapadas, 16 powerful and vast kingdoms and oligarchic republics. These Mahajanapadas evolved and flourished in a belt stretching from Gandhara in the northwest to Bengal in the eastern part of the Indian subcontinent, and included parts of the Trans-Vindhyan region. Ancient Buddhist texts, like the Anguttara Nikaya, make frequent reference to these 16 great kingdoms and republics: Anga, Asaka, Avanti, Chedi, Gandhara, Kashi, Cambodia, Kosala, Kuru, Magadha, Malla, Matsya, Panchala, Sarasna, Vrji, and Vatsa. This period saw the second major rise of urbanism in India after the Indus Valley Civilization. Early republics or Ganasanga, such as Shakyas, Kalyas, Malaccas, and Likkavas had republican governments. Ganasangas, such as the Malaccas, centered in the city of Kusinagara, and the Vajika League, centered in the city of Vaishali, existed as early as the 6th century BCE and persisted in some areas until the 4th century CE. The most famous clan amongst the ruling confederate clans of the Vaji Mahajanapada were the Likkavas. This period corresponds in an archaeological context to the northern black polished ware culture, especially focused in the central Ganges plain but also spreading across vast areas of the northern and central Indian subcontinent. This culture is characterized by the emergence of large cities with massive fortifications, significant population growth, increased social stratification, wide-ranging trade networks, construction of public architecture and water channels, specialized craft industries, a system of weights, punch-marked coins, and the introduction of writing in the form of Brahmi and Kharosthi scripts. The language of the gentry at that time was Sanskrit, while the languages of the general population of northern India are referred to as Prakrits. Many of the 16 kingdoms had coalesced into 4 major ones by 500 over 400 BCE by the time of Gautama Buddha. These 4 were Vatsa, Avanti, Kosala, and Magadha. Large settlements that can be characterized as towns, the largest of which were fortified by ditches or moats and embankments made of piled earth with wooden palisades. The central Ganges plain, where Magadha gained prominence, forming the base of the Maurya Empire, was a distinct cultural area, with new states arising after 500 BCE. It was influenced by the Vedic culture, but differed markedly from the Kuru Panchala region. It was the area of the earliest known cultivation of rice in South Asia, and by 1800 BCE was the location of an advanced Neolithic population associated with the sites of Kairand and Chechar. In this region, the Esramanic movements flourished, and Jainism and Buddhism originated. The time between 800 BCE and 400 BCE witnessed the composition of the earliest Upanishads, which formed the theoretical basis of classical Hinduism and are also known as Vedanta. The increasing urbanization of India in the 7th and 6th centuries BCE led to the rise of new ascetic or Esramana movements which challenged the orthodoxy of rituals. Mahavira c. 549,477 BCE, proponent of Jainism, and Gautama Buddha, founder of Buddhism, were the most prominent icons of this movement. Esramana gave rise to the concept of the cycle of birth and death, the concept of samsara, and the concept of liberation. Buddha found a middle way that ameliorated the extreme asceticism found in the Esramana religions. Around the same time, Mahavira propagated a theology that was to later become Jainism. However, Jain orthodoxy believes the teachings of the Tirthankaras predates all known time, and scholars believe Parshvanatha, accorded status as the 23rd Tirthankara, was a historical figure. The Vedas are believed to have documented a few Tirthankaras in an ascetic order similar to the Esramana movement. The Sanskrit epics Ramayana and Mahabharata were composed during this period. The Mahabharata remains the longest single poem in the world. Historians formerly postulated an epic age as the milieu of these 2 epic poems, but now recognize that the texts went through multiple stages of development over centuries. The existing texts of these epics are believed to belong to the post-Vedic age, between c. 400 BCE and 400 CE. Magadha formed one of the 16 Mahajanapadas or kingdoms in ancient India. The core of the kingdom was the area of Bihar south of the Ganges. Its first capital was Rajagriha, then Pataliputra. Magadha expanded to include most of Bihar and Bengal with the conquest of Likhavi and Angor respectively, followed by much of eastern Uttar Pradesh and Orissa. The ancient kingdom of Magadha is heavily mentioned in Jain and Buddhist texts. It is also mentioned in the Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Puranas. The earliest reference to the Magadha people occurs in the Atharva Veda, where they are found listed along with the Angas, Gandharas, and Mujavats. Magadha played an important role in the development of Jainism and Buddhism. The Magadha kingdom included republican communities such as the community of Rajakumara. Villages had their own assemblies under their local chiefs called Gramaka. Their administrations were divided into executive, judicial, and military functions. Early sources, from the Buddhist Pali Canon, the Jain Agamas, and the Hindu Puranas, mention Magadha being ruled by the Pratyota dynasty and Haryanka dynasty for some 200 years, c. 600,413 BCE. King Bimbisara of the Haryanka dynasty led an active and expansive policy, conquering Anga in what is now eastern Bihar and West Bengal. King Bimbisara was overthrown and killed by his son, Prince Ajatashatru, who continued the expansionist policy of Magadha. During this period, Gautama Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, lived much of his life in the Magadha kingdom. He attained enlightenment in Bodh Gaya, gave his first sermon in Sarnath, and the first Buddhist council was held in Rajgriha. The Haryanka dynasty was overthrown by the Sheshanaga dynasty. The last Sheshanaga ruler, Kalasoka, was assassinated by Mahapadmananda in 345 BCE, the first of the so-called Nine Nandas. Indian campaign of Alexander the Great. The Nanda Empire, at its greatest extent, extended from Bengal in the east to the Punjab region in the west and as far south as the Vindhya range. The Nanda dynasty was famed for their great wealth. The Nanda dynasty built on the foundations laid by their Haryanka and Sheshanaga predecessors to create the first great empire of North India. To achieve this objective, they built a vast army, consisting of 200,000 infantry, 20,000 cavalry, 2,000 war chariots, and 3,000 war elephants. The Maurya Empire unified most of the Indian subcontinent into one state, and was the largest empire ever to exist on the Indian subcontinent. At its greatest extent, the Mauryan Empire stretched to the north up to the natural boundaries of the Himalayas and to the east into what is now Assam. To the west, it reached beyond modern Pakistan, to the Hindu Kush Mountains in what is now Afghanistan. The empire was established by Chandragupta Maurya, assisted by Chanakya in Magadha when he overthrew the Nanda Empire. Chandragupta rapidly expanded his power westwards across central and western India, and by 317 BCE the empire had fully occupied northwestern India. The Mauryan Empire defeated Seleucus I, founder of the Seleucid Empire, during the Seleucid-Mauryan War, thus gained additional territory west of the Indus River. Chandragupta's son Bindusara succeeded to the throne around 297 BCE. By the time he died in c. 272 BCE, a large part of the Indian subcontinent was under Mauryan suzerainty. However, the region of Kalinga remained outside Mauryan control, perhaps interfering with trade with the south. Bindusara was succeeded by Ashoka, whose reign lasted until his death in about 232 BCE. His campaign against the Kalingans in about 260 BCE, though successful, led to immense loss of life and misery. This led Ashoka to shun violence and subsequently to embrace Buddhism. The empire began to decline after his death, and the last Mauryan ruler, Brihadratha, was assassinated by Pushyamitra Shunga to establish the Shunga Empire. Under Chandragupta Maurya and his successors, internal and external trade, agriculture, and economic activities all thrived and expanded across India thanks to the creation of a single efficient system of finance, administration, and security. The Mauryans built the Grand Trunk Road, one of Asia's oldest and longest major roads connecting the Indian subcontinent with Central Asia. After the Kalinga War, the empire experienced nearly half a century of peace and security under Ashoka. Mauryan India also enjoyed an era of social harmony, religious transformation, and expansion of scientific knowledge. Chandragupta Maurya's embrace of Jainism increased social and religious renewal and reform across his society, while Ashoka's embrace of Buddhism has been said to have been the foundation of the reign of social and political peace and non-violence across India. Ashoka sponsored Buddhist missions into Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, West Asia, North Africa, and Mediterranean Europe. The Arthashastra written by Chanakya and the Edicts of Ashoka are the primary written records of the Mauryan times. Archaeologically, this period falls in the era of northern black polished ware. The Mauryan Empire was based on a modern and efficient economy and society. However, the sale of merchandise was closely regulated by the government. Although there was no banking in the Mauryan society, usury was customary. A significant amount of written records on slavery are found, suggesting a prevalence thereof. During this period, a high-quality steel called Wootz steel was developed in South India and was later exported to China and Arabia. Soon we will publish Episode 3. Thank you for watching.